Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the JRB podcast. I'm Ryan Levine, here with Jeff Jones and Bohdan Temnyk.
Hello.
Hey.
And today we're going to talk about the YCS events that just finished. That would be the 3v3 in Quito and YCS Utrecht, as well as potentially where the top decks are standing and how they may shift going into YCS Minneapolis and the introduction of Darkwing Blast. So I personally didn't watch a lot of the coverage, and by I didn't watch a lot, I mean I watched basically none. I just kind of checked the like the deck breakdown and the deck and the top decks after it was all over. And Quito, I just kind of heard Furman, Blake, and Asala did get third, top four. Did they win the third, fourth? I think they got third.
Yeah, they got third. Yeah,
at Quito. So I vaguely, heard what was going on there, but I don't know if you guys have more information. I'm sure Bohdan has a lot more information on the specifics if you want to take it away and break it down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was just gonna say it was the same for me. Where I the only match I watched was the finals of the European one. So
I watched a couple rounds in Swiss. Like just some notable ones. Obviously, they're trying to feature a lot more of the innovative decks, and it's like kind of a wide format. Probably not as wide as they thought, considering the top four ended up being like three Rune Sprite, and then just one other Sprite, and then obviously like you had your Tour Element just spread out, and then the Outliers as expected. And then during Swiss, they're putting up the what do you call it? The legendary fisherman deck, like the Umi, the fish deck, and just like 6 samurai FTK. So like you would watch it and just think it's a different tournament entirely. But yeah, so that was like, I don't know, it's kind of like fun to watch because like you're just sitting there like, oh, I wonder if this will top. Like the tournament's big enough. Apparently they entered a bunch of people into round 1 that hadn't submitted deck lists. So 300 people that were like technically no-shows, or maybe they did submit it, but they were just no-shows anyway because of like apparently travel issues in Europe. Some people missed their flight and like trains got canceled. So people were like either no-show for round 1, they were in the country of the Netherlands, but they just weren't able to get there, or like their flight just missed entirely. I think Gabriel Netz said that he queued round 1 into someone from his local area that missed their flight. So that's kind of funny, right?
Sure.
And then some other people told us that the beginning of round day 2, so that would have been round 10, that their opponent didn't show up, and that was because some people picked the latest train to get there within a reasonable period of time, and that train got canceled, which I thought was just like,
wow.
Okay, cool. You know what I mean? Like imagine like getting that destroyed. But yeah. So,
well, if you recall our round 1 of the 3v3 YCS in Vegas, our opponent's team, or like our opponents didn't show up round 1 for the 3v3 in Vegas, if you remember, and it was like people that you knew, and we asked them about it later, and they were like, our Uber driver just didn't take them to the venue. Like the Uber driver just like drove around Vegas, like showing them
that
things.
Kind of stuff is so
like
crazy,
that's just
dude.
so crazy.
That's also just like sort of like another like guide to like preparing for an event. It's just like always expect the unexpected.
Yeah, don't let your
thing,
Uber driver take
like,
you on a tour of Vegas.
Literally, yeah. So it's like, okay, well, the event is like at this time, like you want to sleep in, like, oh, okay, and everyone ends up getting a very poor amount of sleep before an event starts usually. So maybe you should just like not sleep and try and get there early or something. Like, who knows?
That's
right?
Do not listen to. That's not good advice. I mean, getting there early is
like I think 4 hours sleep and like 4 hours sleep and like no sleep is about the same thing.
Oh my god! Stop.
Okay,
for the record, get there early. Good. Stay up all night. Not good. Please get a reasonable amount of sleep and get to the venue early.
Right.
You'll be fine. But so like
Bohdan just poisoning the youth.
Euros, so the Utrecht, the YCS, that ended up, I think, panning out the way everyone sort of expected, just based on like testing, because I think tier was
well, not to me and Ryan, because me and Ryan were apparently out of the loop. No one was talking to us, right?
Yeah, I mean, like we didn't have any event. Like I guess the Europeans that were like testing for Utrecht, right? Like in North America, like we weren't going to Quito, we weren't going to Utrecht, so like I mean, I wasn't testing with anybody for this event. Like I didn't, because the next tournament I'm playing is Minneapolis, which I have been testing for, and I've been testing with Darkwing Blast, right? So I had no idea what was going to happen this weekend. Yeah. Like I wasn't testing at all.
You had a lot of like the circles became skewed because there were people who were solely testing Darkwing Blast, there were people solely testing the Pasadena format.
Yes, because that will be a different format than Minneapolis.
Exactly. So like you just had all of these pockets of like, obviously you want to help your friends, but it was more related to I think initially a lot of people were testing like tier, trying to see what they could do post ban list. And it became really, really evident that you just couldn't do what you could do before. And what you could do before also had sort of like this surprise factor behind it, where like you're kind of doing new things every week, but it's backed by the same sort of like, if it fails, I do have snow, I do have like all of these other things that I've like added to the deck. And I think it was just like so much more powerful than Sprite that it just didn't make a difference. And that was for like most tier variants, right? And then moving like into Quito and Utrecht, it was just, well, what do we put in this deck? Let's put Lunar Light cards. You play with the Lunar Light cards for a couple games, you just get like all of these like weird sort of pairings of hands. You like play going second into certain boards, and you're just like, wow, like these cards are terrible. Put the Scareclaw cards in your deck, you sort of find like the same thing. And this is before you have to deal with like all of the cheese decks, like your Exorcist or a Flunder, and everything else is like your powerful deck that just went from like all gas, like just slapping cards down, and really only having to worry about like Abyss Dweller or just like a D shifter cheese deck, to like, oh, I have to worry about everything. Like like Sprite isn't doing Elf Toad at all. And now it's just doing like the fair thing. It's like, oh, but you have to worry about that. You know what I mean? Like MST on like Tiger randomly becomes an issue if you're going second or something. It's just really, really silly. So I think that's why a lot of people gravitated towards like the more conventional Sprite decks. Well, like conventional in the sense that like it's literally just like Sprite card, Runic card, and then like the text.
If I may interject, I think, in my opinion, the biggest difference maker was, and something that we kept saying whenever we would try this deck, is that the Runic cards were really, really bad into snow, right?
Yes.
Like, you want to use your Runic card as your first monster because you want to get a level 2 so you can special summon your Sprite cards. Like, you don't want to hole your Runic cards. Like, you can't really do that, right? Like, they're at their best when you play them first, and they have to go to the extra monster zone. So what would happen 99% of the time is you go Runic guy to extra monster zone. Opponent goes, okay, I'll snow it face down, and then you lose.
Yes.
And without snow, there's a lot more room to open up. Like, I think it's really interesting how Toad, in its form pre-ban list, really strangled a lot of the more fair decks. Or at least that's what we kept saying. Like, oh, without Ronin, now it's harder to make Toad, and now without Toad, the mid-range decks aren't gonna have more room. I think it was realistically Snow was the card that was strangling the mid-range decks, honestly, like the more fair decks. And without Snow, even though Sprite doesn't have the double Toad line, or like they do kind of, like it's just not as easy, right? Like you need an extra monster. They can still do Eperia Cap Shell, where they like Eperia, Eperia draw a card, Gigantic out Cap Shell, make Elf draw a card, bring back Elf, or bring back Cap Shell, make Gin Buster. Then when they detach Gin Buster, Cap Shell draws a card. Then they Elf back Eperia, and they draw 4 cards. And they Runic you, and they draw 3 more cards. And it's like they draw literally 14 cards, or something like just outrageous. And you're sitting there, and you're like, one snow would have stopped all of this. Just one snow is all it would have taken.
In a lot of the feature matches, you would see the Runic Sprite player just like activate a spell to summon the level 2. Then they would discard a card and get impermed, and then they would like set 1 and pause.
Yeah,
like that would happen just so often. And I was thinking, I was like, damn, like I guess if this resolved, you won the game. And you still don't like lose the game, right? Because I'm thinking of all the combinations of cards that like not necessarily like punish an imperm, because like, well, look, like you're trading imperm like 1-for-1, and they're not getting to the field
It would be
spell,
like
which is like
Sprite
all you
Blue.
can hope for.
Like Sprite Blue
Yeah,
would probably
exactly.
be the
Yeah.
card that just, but you have to imperm the field spell
Oh,
searching
yeah.
guy, or else you just get
Yeah,
obliterated, probably.
pretty much, right? Yeah, if they go like quick play, discard like another rune spell, you're gonna get destroyed.
Yeah.
I think you just like have to go for it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I think the heavier rune package was like kind of unexpected, and that might have been the difference maker for a lot of these decks. Like, who can really tell? I think this format's something that like people aren't really gonna like analyze looking back on.
Because it's done,
Um,
essentially. Like, it's more or
yeah,
less finished,
pretty
right?
much, right?
If
Like,
if
I think
Darkwing Blast
you'll take.
doesn't finish it, then pass it. Then Magical Mavens will, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Or Magnificent Mavens.
Yeah, I think like you'll look back on this with maybe some sort of trying to think of the word, but like you'll take the information from like these two events, and if you need to apply it to something in the future, maybe it's like related to Runic Sprite or some of the tech cards that they were using. I think the big takeaway is probably like the utility of Mannequin Cat. That a lot of people was sort of just like that's the one thing I'm looking at, right? Like moving forward is like, oh, not necessarily will I have the rune cards in my deck. It's just like, let's look at the effectiveness of the tech cards that they were like sort of like using that they weren't using before. So it was like the Mannequin Cat in the extra deck with a lot of utility in the side deck, where they would just summon Mannequin Cat, and you would have the option to summon like Thunder King Raya. You'd have the option to summon the turtle, which I think is hilarious, by the way.
Like
That's a card I would
Tetsuno
always
Rat
read.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the floodgate turtle. Like,
Yeah.
that's a card I would always read.
Oh,
and I would think,
a lot of people probably don't know what that one is. So can you explain
oh,
that?
sorry. Yeah, so let me actually get the name up.
It's like yeah, I will also.
It's like Tetsuo Rat Numan, right?
Yeah, it's funny because I saw the picture and I thought to myself, "Oh my god, I'm pretty sure I've played that in like one of the video games, but I don't know like what, like why." But it just looked at it and I
I'm
was
not
like,
gonna
"Oh,
lie.
how funny."
It's also just like spelling this card.
It is
Okay, I found it.
Testudo Erat Numen, and it's a level 1
Numen.
Aqua, 1800 defense, 0 attack. Neither player can special summon monsters with 1800 or more attack.
Yeah, so this card is just like silly, right? But I think like it Japan didn't really look at cards like this for whatever reason, and they were more looking for stuff like Chaos Hunter and everything else. Um, I think this card is probably on par with Chaos Hunter in terms of like what you're stopping. I don't necessarily like the idea of Thunder King Raya, because I think it's just like pretty clunky. Um, Whereas like in the rune deck, if you are just playing normal Yu-Gi-Oh, you can like draw this level 1 and just summon it. I think like summoning Ryo is like not as good maybe as this in the matchups where like you're putting Ryo in, but it's something I hadn't really tested. Like obviously like Mannequin Cat summon Ryo to block like Sprite Blue is kind of ridiculous, but yeah, like maybe it's gonna like condense to the point where like one card is better than the other, and you don't have to like spread that many spots, because like how many times are you summoning Mannequin Cat turn 1, and how many times is it resolving like on the following turn, and like when is this good if something like Tactics is in the format, because like you're just triggering Cat during their main phase 1 a lot of the time.
Also, how is Cat gonna stack up against Fenrir? Right.
Yeah,
a card that's like
anticipated
one, right? To be very heavily played
So
in like a lot of decks.
It's that, and also like I guess you do have the dimension of like more just like generic big guy can sort of float out right post Darkwing Blast. So it's something to look at. So like you're gonna have to sort of like not fall back on the Mannequin Cat plan maybe, but it'll depend on like again what people gravitate towards. Like you could probably take Joshua Schmidt's deck to Minneapolis and have some success, but like I to what extent I'm not entirely sure. So that'll be something interesting to look at. Like you could just summon Chaos Hunter and then block out a lot of the Bestial decks. Could be interesting. But then again, like the turtle sort of does that too. So I don't know. It'll be interesting for sure. But I think that was a big one. And like
summon Jowgen or Kaiku, and we really take
yeah,
it
that
back.
also works, right? Yeah, true. You can play Spellbook of Judgment and a small Spellbook package. Nah, I'm just messing with you. Dude, ulti Spellbook of Fate is like ulti first set Spellbook of Fate is just like 100, and I had to look back to figure out when that happened. And no, it was pretty recently. It's just like it's like 110 on like a near mint copy on TCG. I was just sick. I was baffled.
Well, they've always been kind of
like,
up there, like spellbook cards in general.
No,
That's been kind of like a fan favorite, high rarity
Fate was the
archetype.
one. Fate was the one that was just like never expensive.
Yeah, that is
but
true.
As long as I can remember, it was like, always like Secrets Blue Boy, because like the generics, right? Yeah.
After knowledge.
Yeah. So like I think Secrets doesn't exist in first set, and it's solely not existing in Unlim. So that's like maybe something, if you have like FOMO, you should probably like try and get them out. I don't necessarily think they'll be playable at any point in time, but here we are. So back onto the subject of the whole like text coming out of the weekend. I do think like the Lava Golem and Sphere Mode stuff is something we expected from the beginning. I know like a lot of our initial testing for Runic did have stuff like Sphere Mode in the main deck, because obviously like no battle phase, can't really play it, can't access Zeus like a generic Sprite deck would.
I think a big thing that caught on that we didn't think of at the time when we were testing months ago with it was the little cat.
A wind-up kitten.
A wind-up kitten.
That's definitely another one. Yeah, that was definitely like a really good thing.
And that's a big one that helps you like get rid of 2 monsters on a field, or like use your Lava Golem, then bounce it back to hand so you can Lava Golem again. And that's definitely a big one in my opinion that would lead to Sprite being able to kind of overcome the ability or not the ability, but the deficiency of not being able to have a battle phase and clear big monsters.
Yeah, like specifically the Runic Sprite version. Like not necessarily like Splashing Kitten and Daddy Sprite deck, but like the Runic Sprite deck that like removal it really struggles for. Like, yeah, if you don't have a battle phase, putting up Toads and not clearing your opponent's field didn't do anything. So instead of doing that, you just bounce everything.
That was the biggest problem with like the early iteration of like Sprite, or even just like Rune Sprite, right? Like it was so easy to tunnel into like how powerful a lot of the cards your deck had like were, because you'd look at stuff like Diva and like Nimble Beaver and stuff like that and be like, oh, this card is just like that. It has to be ridiculous, because like you were playing into stuff like Snow and everything else, right? Now it's like maybe not, like maybe like the utility is better, and like I think Wind Up Kitten did solve Wyatt a lot. And I'm glad we sort of advanced to that compared to like where they were at. They were doing stuff like Gale Dogra. I didn't think that was like very, very good. So I'm glad like in field testing, you know, that if we look at like the results of Utrecht and Keto, it's just like you'll see the list sort of standardized to the point of like, no, like you don't need to pay 6,000 life points and end your turn with like 8 of them. You know what I mean? Like you just now actually do something, you know, kind of just like conducive to how Yu-Gi-Oh is meant to be played, not like, you know, sitting on treading on eggshells, like playing your match because, you know, you activated starter and you paid 6,000. That was something everyone would talk to me. It's like, what do you think of Gale Dogger? I'm like, I don't think that's what you want to be doing.
Like maybe on 7,100 life points. Yeah.
Yes, you start your turn and you lose to Tremendous Fire. Like
you lose to Long Yun.
Yeah, but like so I think like the Lava Golem Sphere Mode stuff obviously solved some problems. Like I think those were there at like the beginning. Like people sort of played that stuff. I think another one is like more people realized how good Eradicator was in that deck specifically. That's something I was really surprised about. A lot of people weren't playing that. And the first time I saw it was in Nick Ma's deck from the Philly regionals. I think that's like obviously floating around beforehand, but I really enjoyed the utility of Eradicator, and I felt like the normal Sprite deck didn't really get to have that benefit. Like, you know, obviously like they were able to do like Deck Debbie and Code, the Codebreaker Buyers, Swordsman, whatever, like initially. But like the rune cards making the gigantic 32 at the beginning means that you sort of do have the option of like, you know, you can play Eradicator, you can play Trap It, you can play DDB, depending on how the format pans out. I thought that's always kind of cool. And I think that's a big one. If you weren't playing Eradicator, you were never winning the mirror match at all. And I think if Eradicator resolved from maybe Dinkabui or Josh, you would have seen like game 2 end a lot quicker. Because I think those games just go so long and so wide, and you need blowout cards like that. Whereas like if you're trading cards like Cosmic, I still think the game doesn't end quicker, like quick enough in like actual gameplay. Because like, obviously like you're trading like Cosmic for field, and if they're playing multiple field, like it's still gonna bounce back and forth. Like you're never closing the game because if you activate a rune card, you're not entering battle phase.
And you have
And
turns
that's
to
basically
look
just
for
like
it.
a turn skip. Yeah, exactly.
Because
right?
they're
So
not going
like,
to kill you, right? Like you guys are going to be passing back, and your guys are going to be drawing a lot of cards. So even if you don't see it turn one, somebody's probably going to see it. Probably going to see it eventually.
Something funny, something like really, really funny. Every Runic card like every initial Runic card they activate like turn after turn, essentially just becomes like Upstart Goblin for the opponent, like Wabaku for you sort of deal, where it's like the game just keeps getting dragged out by like design of the card more than anything else. And I think that's just like that's a mirror match I don't want to play. So I wasn't really like too sure that you'd see too much Rune Sprite. I think like if I played like one of these big events and I made it to like deeper in the tournament and I saw more Rune Sprite decks, I would be kind of sick, and I would have been like, oh man, like maybe we should have had something more ignorant. You know what I mean? Like maybe this should have been like another blowout. Maybe my EEV should have had like a trap trick alongside it or something. That would have been something I like would have looked back on in hindsight and be like, maybe this is something that needed to be done. Because like you saw the finals decided by Red Resonating. I don't think that's not like good Yu-Gi-Oh. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it
it
should have
doesn't
had
look good
like
for them either. Like
no, for sure, for sure. It's like if there was like a blowout Eradicator or something, or like maybe there was like another tech card for the mirror match, that would have been really, really interesting. But no, that wasn't the case, and we sort of just had to watch them summon Red Resonator multiple times in a game 2 scenario with like 20 there was like 15 minutes left on the clock or something. Like it wasn't even like, oh, he played slow. It's like no, he gained a lot of his life points like turn after turn, and
and both players don't have a battle phase.
yeah,
like for the whole game.
Right?
Like it's gonna take a while.
Oh, the other thing was like Josh, I think banished Jinkabui's Red Resonator off
he did off of one of his Runic spells, yeah.
Which I think is just like a crazy swing. So the other thing I noticed like watching that final match as well. So this is assuming that you can't concede a finals, which is in the document for a lot of these like tier 2 or tier 3. I don't remember what they changed it to. It used to be like a tier 1 and a tier 2 event, and now I think they have
it's
like
all different.
A tier 3 and something else. Yeah. So it's like I think so what happens is if you can never concede game 2, Josh has such an advantage winning the game 1 in a timed environment because, well, Dinkabui can't concede for time management because if he concedes, he loses the match.
Yeah,
right?
Correct.
However, Josh at any point is free to lose and then start his game 3 with the, a life game card against a deck that just like can't play its engine out without skipping its first battle phase. So he gets 2 times to try that. And it's just like, what's the point? You know what I mean? Like the game was literally decided by who won game 1, which is like, funny, haha, like this is what modern Yu-Gi-Oh has come to, but like, no, like some of the other decks still have like playback, if you're playing in like an untimed environment or like, just, in testing or something, like, yeah, you can win game 1 and then lose the rest of the match.
Also, if it was not a mirror match, it might not have ended like that.
Yeah, pretty much,
but
right?
I think
like
testing with the clock
like
is really important. I did that with
But like, do you want to sit there and play Rune Sprite mirror matches?
Well,
like,
if you're gonna win if you want to win the YCS, I think you have to, right? Like, I don't think
I think I would try and pocket it in terms of like I'm not gonna play a full match with a mirror match. I'm probably only gonna play like maybe like a pocket of like game 1s. Identify if there's anything that has like enough overlap, knowing that this is like a represented deck, right? And then maybe try and find the stupid blowout card for game 2 and 3. Because I don't think you're gonna gain anything from like time management in that matchup specifically, right? Like I think you just really have
I'm just
to
saying
get
in general when you're testing, you should play like at least one match with a clock just to see what's happening, because I think a lot of people in testing. So I think what used to happen is people used to be like, no takebacks, like you messed up. Even in testing, people would get really, really like sharky because that was like how the game was. I don't know how to explain it. And then kind of as the years went on and the better players kind of explained to the masses, I guess, like, No, like when you test, like you should like allow takebacks, and you should discuss, like it doesn't matter who wins in testing. You should both be playing to learn and to be improving yourselves. And then maybe to a certain extent that gets taken too far, and now people are removing themselves so far from the actual tournament environment that I think it's really important to ground yourself and at least play one match with the clock. Like in a long testing session, yes, you should be doing a lot of games where you're doing game ones, siding, like, and like in my opinion, the most efficient way, usually just to get reps in, is do game ones and then like alternate who goes first or whatever, not just, loser goes first, just, alternate going first. And then just for time management's sake, if you're playing with physical cards, like side for going first and your opponent sides for going second, and then just play a bunch of games where you go first, then switch your opponent sides for going first, then you side for going second, and play a bunch of games like that. And then when you both have a good idea of what you should be doing in the matchup and what you're planning, play a timed match to give yourself an actual idea of how a tournament would play out, and how and so you can learn how to maybe manage your time more correctly. Then you can go back to playing as you were, with the idea of like, okay, so the match, like this match that we played went 38 minutes. It was a pretty average match by the standards of what we've been playing. Maybe I need to adjust for that. Or like, oh, this match was really quick. Like we had a bunch of blowout cards and the match was over really quickly. Like you can kind of go from there. But I think if you never take the clock into account, you're definitely going to have a lot more scenarios like this, right?
Well, that's like the other sort of thing where it's like, yeah, you can get by on theory alone, and some people undervalue the experience of actually just like playing a locals with a deck, maybe before a large event. And I've been down that track before as well. If I didn't play like random locals leading up to Oceanics, I definitely wouldn't have realized like, oh, like how relevant it is to just like factor in time, and like how people are still like very new to like certain cards. You know what I mean? Like it's just like your average player at locals is usually going to be like close enough to your average player at a YCS.
In the early rounds,
I don't know
for
why.
sure.
And well, like no, just like in general, though, I don't even know like how you would refute it, because like these are all generally the same people. No locals is going to be that stuff that it's not going to translate to like your tournament experience at a YCS. Like I'm bursting soft people into like the last round of a YCS, it just doesn't make a difference. Like you'll know, like, even just like watching some of the people that you think are like really really good, myself included. It's like you can make mistakes. You can just have like a long day. Games can sort of just like be decided by people messing up a lot. So I still value like obviously not basing my entire testing on that, or like I'm going to assume like the general player base is going to play the same way as my local players, because that's like what do we call it, inbred testing, right?
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. You just take all of the variables, and I think like you can't, like you said, you either do it at home with a clock on Dueling Book or something, or try and replicate the experience as best you can. And how best can you do it without actually playing a tournament? It's like, no, you just have to play a tournament.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
All right, so
I think that should cover the YCS.
We can move on from Runic Sprite.
I think there's anything.
I guess,
yeah,
unless Jeff, unless you have a final
thought. Anything else, right?
No,
Nothing
I mean that
really
was
popped up.
Yeah, no, I think it's okay to move on to the next little subject of we talked about
Darkwing
Minneapolis
Blast.
now. Or
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think the big ticket one is the bestial cards, right? I think that's the big. I mean, like I guess we can kind of break it down into Sprite support, tier support, bestials, and Kostrila, more specifically Fenrir.
Fenrir,
right? Yeah, like most for now Fenrir specifically. But and I think it's like, so tier got a couple cards, Sprite got a couple cards, and I think, in my opinion, maybe with the exception of like Snow is kind of an irreplaceable card, I think this reminds me a lot of new challengers. By that I mean, we had the top deck, Shadal and Burning Abyss, and some people might argue Stellar Knight, but I will not. So the top deck, Shadal and Burning Abyss, and then new challengers came out. And what decks got new cards? just the only 2 decks that were already good, right? And we got Virgil, and we got like the new shit all cards like El Shadal Fusion, and now we're looking at this, and we're like, we have Sprite Sprind, and we have Rule Kalos.
Oh, we also got the Clyfort card.
Oh yes, and
yeah.
Which I guess there isn't really like a Cliffort like pure like a deck equivalent in this one, but yeah.
No.
And yeah, so we're just looking at the top decks getting stronger, and I don't know how much I like that dynamic. I don't think it's very interesting when just the good decks get even more tools. But what do you guys think about that?
Well, that's just a case of like these decks are already like too good, but I think the cards that have come out are more generic than I'd like to give them credit for.
What do you like? Such as what?
Well, I think Sprint I think the Sprite cards are so generic that it doesn't matter.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, any Sprite card you print, unless it literally says like your deck can only contain like level 2 Thunder
unless
something.
Unless it's literally
you are now locked to Thunder.
Yeah. Unless it's a literal dueling skill. You may only activate this card if your deck contains 22 Thunder monsters.
Just something ridiculous like that. I don't think it matters. Like you're past the point of no return. I think tier is probably like the only thing that sort of ignores that to an extent. So it's like obviously like, well, tier was already just like ridiculous. It's like, yeah, let's give them like an even better fusion. Let's like make high spirits like marginally better as well. I don't know if it's better. I haven't really tried that.
I mean, now you don't need to play the brick in the extra deck. Like
now
like
I meant more for Cartesia, because like the Lulu is just going to be in your extra deck regardless.
Of course,
right? It just doesn't really make a difference if you play high spirits or not. But yeah, like I think it's just more like by design. I think if a ban list hit, it would be more generic cards, probably like ignoring Lulu.
Well, ban list hit a week ago. I don't know.
Well, no,
I don't know
like,
what you mean.
No, like an actual ban list. Oh no, yeah, you go what I mean.
Well, that was something I actually meant to bring up when we were talking about Utrecht that I forgot, kind of slipped my mind as you were talking, is the decks that got because we mentioned, okay, they hit Ronin Totem and they hit Snow, but they also just hit Fiber and Chaos Ruler. So what that means is that the other decks in the format, like what little pocket of them even existed, kind of disappeared, right? So I think that could be a bigger contributing factor as to also why Top Cut was just 4 Sprite variants, is like, well, you got rid of Punk and you got rid of all the Fiber combos. What's left? Tier and Sprite. All the Sprite lost all the tiers lost in top 8. Now we have now we have Sprite, and that's it.
I think as well, sort of comes back to like your card quality in the tier deck, right? It's like we went from really, really good deck with Snow, right? Like just very uninterrupted, just does what it does.
Sure.
To like, oh, okay, we know what tier does now. Let's do this, and then tier sort of adapted to that, and then it's like, oh wait, hold up, ban list. Now you have to play a worse deck, right? And now we have that one event or like 2 event series out of the way of like, yeah, you're like worse, quote unquote worse tier deck. Like it's still doing ignorant stuff, but like objectively, I think it's worse in a tournament setting. Is now just going to get better for no reason at all. It's just like, hey, here's a new set, tier got support, blah blah blah, throw it in. And then a week after that, or a week and a half, is it? Yeah, it's like a week,
2 weeks,
a week and some change. Yeah. Here's tier being the best deck. It's just like, oh well, it didn't matter what you hit, and maybe you just didn't have to hit Chaos Ruler and Fibrax, knowing full well that like tier is just going to be the perceived best deck anyway in 3 weeks, regardless. And like you could have just had a more wide format. Like who's putting Punk cards and Chaos Ruler in their Shizu deck? Who's doing any of that? To be honest, like it's probably just irrelevant. They probably could have just kept those cards and it would have been fine. And then you might have seen it like not a healthier sort of format for like the next month, but it would have been a little bit more interesting for sure. Like, I think they hit cards that should have been hit a while ago versus like something else. That's probably a different topic of discussion.
Yeah, but so Sprite and tier getting support, and then I think you're right. I actually think saying like Sprite Sprind is Sprite support is like not even it's pretty disingenuous. It's just game Yu-Gi-Oh!
Again,
dumb combo
literally
support.
what Road of the King had that made me giggle every time I read it. It was just Sprite fell off in Japan, but every extra deck has gigantic elf and sprint.
Literally every single one. Every single one had gigantic elf and sprint.
Disgusting.
And I was just like,
absolutely disgusting.
If there was one level 2 monster in their deck, they had gigantic Sprite and sprint. Yep. And yeah, it's just like I think when you're talking about Sprite cards being too generic, I think if you were talking about just like the extra deck cards, absolutely. Like I don't think Sprite Blue is too generic, but I definitely think all the extra deck cards are like probably a little too easy to make. Maybe so. Okay, this is gonna sound like this. Just like I send this to somebody because they only respond to buzzwords. Like if I try to explain a logical thought, they don't know what's going on. But if I send them buzzwords, they go, "Oh wow, that's crazy," and I go, "Yes." I said, Sprite Sprint is just new fiber or new Anaconda, and by that I mean in a deck that played Anaconda or a deck that played fiber. For example, like maybe like a Sword Soul deck that played Fusion Destiny, or like any sort of like adventure, like combo deck that played fiber. You would just need 2 monsters or a monster plus a tuner, and you could do everything. Like in Sword Soul, in like the Sword Soul Fusion Destiny deck, Nibiru was 1/2 of an Anaconda if you went second. Like if you went second and you Nibiru'd them, then you went summon Moye and they hand trapped you. Okay, make Anaconda with Moye and Nibiru. Like what? Like why? Like why is that? Like what is that? And then similarly, in like an adventure tier deck, or like the Eldritch like Cyberse deck, it's just like it doesn't matter what you have. It's just all so generic that it's so hard to stop you, because whatever your deck was doing, whatever your main combo in your deck was trying to achieve, if you can just put a level 2 monster on the field, you can just go Sprint or Elf, and then now you can just pivot into a different combo entirely. And everything your opponent did to stop you is now made completely irrelevant.
Yeah. No, I can agree with that.
And I think that's what happens whenever we get generic extra deck cards like this, right?
It's a big oversight. Like, can we even look at it as like an oversight? It's like, no, that was probably their intention, to be honest. Like,
do we really think that was their intention?
Do they think that, like, I mean, what I mean by that is like into your element, right? Like they're just doing whatever you like you DD Crow, like when Havnus tries to activate, maybe like you Imperm Kit Kalos, then they just like make Dark, like take your DD Crow, use Dark and DD Crow to make Sprint, because Dark is a link too. Send Merly, like make like rule Kalos. It's like, was that intent? Like, is that what's supposed to happen? You know what I mean? Like, is that like I guess maybe
from a lore perspective, potentially, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Like who knows? You can't really tell.
Sure.
Konami is too dangerous. I know. Do we want to look at like the sleeper decks coming into Minneapolis? I think there's like maybe 1 or 2.
Maybe. I don't know enough about the deck to talk about it, but I know that
one's
it's
more relevant post
after Maiden.
Is it?
Yeah,
okay.
it's
Sure.
the Maiden cards to mill.
Sure.
Yeah, because it has a lot of issue like getting going in the current like version of Kia. Even when you add in like the new cards like Scream and everything else, I think it's still like kind of lacking stuff. But when you get to have like the really ignorant, like the Ishizu hand trap level of like this card just interacts on either turn, I think it really can push that deck a little bit further ahead. But I don't think it's better than like a normal Ishizu tier deck, which is the other issue. And I don't think it's like better than like a bestial sort of like heavier deck into that deck, But it's something interesting. Like maybe if the format doesn't pan out the way we think it does, and it's a little bit more broad, then I think the Naturia cards could definitely have a spot as like a medical. But for right now, it's something I'm not really looking at. Might just disregard it for a while.
I think it's funny that we mentioned Naturia before the other deck that came in this, and that was the Draco Slayer Pendulum.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that deck even existed.
That was the one. I don't know why you mentioned Naturia. I was literally going to talk about
because I like that deck too. I know I like that deck too. I don't know why Anyway, yeah,
So
go ahead.
yes, yeah. I mean, obviously, we talk about like these really generic good cards like Fenrir and the Bestial, and Bestial obviously are heavily geared towards stopping tier limits in this format. And if people want to lean into the Bestials, not only is the Sprite deck pretty immune to those cards, but so are the Pendulums. And with the Draco Slayers, you are also able to make a Beast Dweller, which is good against, obviously, Tier Limit. And with their new monster, Magic Pegasus, allows you to search your deck for any field spell you want. So you can grab things like Mystic Mine or Necro Valley. And Necro Valley
Mhm.
will shut off the
Or Secret
tiers.
Village.
Or Secret Village, yes.
Yeah.
And Secret Village, guess what that'll do? That'll shut down the Runic cards.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is 100% a sleeper deck because it is resistant to a lot of the popular cards I think we're going to see, as well as having the searchability of these cards that shut down decks entirely. Um, Obviously, the one downside to this deck I think is it lacks a lot of like strength and like the power department. Its fields like aren't that intimidating. It's trying to just set up like these kind of little fields and prevent you from playing for one turn and then just kill you with summoning Ignister 100 times and spinning all your cards and attacking. Um,
Mm.
not to say that like it can't make fields. It mostly they're just not as crazy as Toad and hand trap thing. It's just like a
The
rank 8,
fields
a
feel
rank
like
4.
literally the same thing Pendulum has done for the last
Forever.
like
Yeah.
however many years,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like here's a Herb Harbinger, here's like an Abyss Dweller or something, right? It's like very, very steady, very generic. But like you said, like the benefit is it doesn't play into the the suite of DD crews that people are just throwing into that deck, right? It's like the whole thing. It's just a deck that doesn't really care about those cards while also having the ability to summon Dweller and then having some form of interaction with Sprite. That's like a big thing to look at, would you say? Like moving forward, at least for like Minneapolis in that sort of pocket.
Yeah, no,
Mm.
absolutely.
So on
And
that note, do you think the Rika deck could be like obviously now it's well like we can never truly say it fell off. I just think it's like very underrepresented, even though we did see it have results mostly in Europe. I think maybe you saw one top Niagara or something, but that's another deck that doesn't have any light or darks, right? It's like the whole thing. So maybe that's a deck that you could look at as well for like a potential medical. Doesn't really play into too many trends, might be something interesting. Obviously pre-Ishizu, because I feel like Ishizu just sort of ignores a lot of those medicals, but maybe for Minneapolis, like if you're not comfortable with any of the new cards, I don't know why you wouldn't be. I think they're all like pretty good and pretty fun.
Yeah.
But you could fall back on something like Rika, and it doesn't play into any of the common trends, except maybe I guess like Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, maybe. Still gets to play the ignorant cards like Rivalry and all of that stuff. So that could be something to look at. I don't think this podcast will be posted before Minneapolis, so if you're hearing it then, well,
It'll
power to you.
probably get posted Friday.
yeah, I think it'll be Friday, so it'll be a day before.
Yeah.
No, let's just post it now. Do it. But yeah, so that's what we're sort of looking at now, right? Like just decks that don't play into like the hive mind trend of like, hey, put a bunch of Bystials in our deck. Let's play the deck that gets destroyed by the Bystials like the least or has like the most high power output to offset your opponent summon skull and banishing your card, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of
Right.
like where we want to be at. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess
So, oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead,
No,
Ryan.
I was gonna say. Well, you go first because you might say the same thing I was gonna say. Just go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I guess
Twins.
going into this, you just want to look at this. So when it comes to Sprite, before this, people probably would have said, "Oh, like standards kind of Sprite was the best version of Sprite."
Mm.
But now, if you have the Runic Sprite deck, it gets kind of weird simply because now the deck, if it's heavily sided against, what do you do? Do you play the deck and expect to get heavily sided against? So you can do things like 3 Cosmic Cyclone and Eradicator, and Cosmic Cyclone deals with the field spell very well. And if they aren't generating cards every turn, that's really the big thing because they're not going to be attacking you.
Mm-hmm.
And so does that mean you go back to a kind of regular Sprite deck with hand traps and like these new cards and just kind of go for this grindy thing, and then, or do you just ignore it all and try to build some super powerful tier deck that plays through all these cards people are trying to get through? Let's say you do like, let's say you go back to um the danger monsters and just kind of just throw as many cards out as possible into your opponent, and no matter how many Bistids or whatever they have, you still have a play. um so what do you think about that? What do you think is going to be the way to go for the mass population of Yu-Gi-Oh players? What do you think is going to happen?
That's
I like to look at it from the perspective of, if you don't know any better, it's most likely more beneficial to you to stick to what you know instead of just diving straight into the deep end if you're just like the average player, right? So I think if people follow that, which they usually should, because I think it's beneficial to like the average player more often, then you might sort of just see very close to what we saw at Utrecht, maybe with some slight adjustments. Like I said, like probably gonna look at more of like, can you get away with Mannequin Cat more than anything, and then approaching like Rune Sprite maybe a little bit more. But then obviously from like the top end, I honestly couldn't really tell, because I don't think one is distinctly better than the other when it's still very undefined. And I think that's like the biggest problem we saw out of like Euros as well. Um, so yeah, I I think at like a mid level for like the general population, you'll probably just see more people gravitate towards Rune Sprite by default, because it's pretty much defined at this point. It's just a tech spot so you get to flip around with. Like maybe you just play Rune Sprite with like the Bistials, right? And just that's it. Like you trade your Lava Golem spot for the DD Crow spot because they're new shiny cards, and then just
One
hope
thing
that
I do
gets you
want to
there.
point out is that I don't think that the Rune Sprite is a very forgiving or easy deck to play.
yes, I agree
And I
Oh,
completely.
think that's also why
definitely
you
not.
saw 2 very good, well-known players in the
Yes,
finals with it.
very some of the most
Um,
accomplished players, really. Like,
so if 100%, like when I was playing this deck before, I was like, oh, the order you play your cards in, like which ones you throw away, when to activate them, the order you put them in the bottom of your deck, just being able to like manage certain things, and also account for the fact you're not going to have a battle phase. It's 100% is not a forgiving deck. One thing can go wrong, and that's it. If you misplay one thing, a lot of the times it's over.
Or
Especially
you
if
also
you're
have to queue into the mirror match, right? And then that just seems like a
right,
headache for the average duelist. But
right, yeah. What I was going to get to next is then you get to the mirror match, which we saw on stream is it's awful. Um,
yeah.
that no one attacking, trying to gain life points or mill the opponent out. It's pretty bad. So that's another thing as well. Is if you're going to play this deck, are you going to play it well, and are you going to be able to play the mirror match well, and be okay with having to play against the mirror? Because I know I would be miserable. I don't know about you guys, but
well, so I haven't really thought about it. However, I will say my jam was the spiral mirror, where you just literally pass for the first 4 turns of the game. So I can't say definitively if I would like or
that's
dislike the
something you
mirror.
can really do when decks are drawing 2 or 3 extra cards per turn.
No, no,
But
well, no, I'm just saying that when you're talking about like, like in terms of like not a whole lot going on, where or it's
so
like
saying
very
for
like
our listeners,
slow.
don't pass the Sprite Runic
Oh
mirror
yeah,
and
that's not.
expect don't do
Yeah, that's not
that.
what I was
Oh yeah,
saying.
yeah,
I was
definitely.
saying in terms of mirrors where they're like very, very like weird compared to like previous games. Like you know, literally one of the like defining plays in the Spiral format was both players pass until one of you discards Master Plan for hand limit. Like that was like a real thing. Like, because if you put any cards in the field, your opponent kills it with tough and kills you, or like if you summon a monster, you get Reapered, and like it just I don't know. But yeah, so I agree with you. It doesn't sound like the most appealing mirror match in the world, but generally in Yu-Gi-Oh, I think mirror matches tend to be less fun than anything else anyway, with some exceptions, I guess. But I genuinely find them to not be as fun.
I would agree, and it always irks me when people say like, "Oh, I like 1 and 2 deck formats. It's the mirror matches are skillful."
Sometimes the mirror matches are. Sometimes.
I would say that might be true for past formats, but I don't think that's really true in current Yu-Gi-Oh because too much goes wrong with losing the die roll.
Yeah, like I like the Necros mirror. I liked
everything
the BA
has
mirror.
to have like an equal power level if you have multiple decks, I think, because when multiple decks are too powerful and you have to like you can never focus enough on like one aspect, sort of what we've seen in like Yu-Gi-Oh for the last like maybe year or two, right, where it's just like here's a bunch of very viable decks, they all do distinctly different things, I don't have enough cards that can overlap, and you take a concession against a certain deck and just pray you don't burst it in a tournament. Whereas before it was like, oh, hey, MST, pop a card, cool. Like, that was literally it. Now it's just like, yes, MST, pop a card, but only in this matchup and only if my opponent's wearing a hat. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I honestly think maybe 2015 was the first time that I think really the decks got strong enough that like generic cards just got pushed out of the game almost entirely. Like you really didn't see like MST was in the main deck of literally every deck ever until Necros came out. Probably, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't think of, because every deck had a trap card in it, no matter what. And now
well,
we get to the ports like that just doesn't happen.
Think about like 2014 when people were main decking cards like Wiretap and 7 tools.
Yeah, I know.
Like that's crazy.
That is crazy.
Like that I had like Wiretap in my deck, knowing full well that like Infernity and Mermail were just like they existed. Or you had like Sylvan, right? But like again, like those were still like relative setup decks. Like looking at like them compared to like modern Yu-Gi-Oh, obviously it's like, yeah, they're combo, but like they're only combo half the time. Like Sylvan would set the mushroom and pass sometimes. Infernity would,
and
like,
if that mushroom resolved, it was really scary.
It was very scary. Yeah. That thing was sick.
Dragon would summon Curry Bandit half the time, right? Like they just Curry Bandit set a back row.
You know what? Sylvan would also do that, which is equally funny. Like that.
Long gone. I just like every time a deck comes out, I'm like, can I summon Curry Bandit in my 2-element deck? I'm like, probably not. Like probably wouldn't get me anywhere. Who knows?
Do you know some people were playing that in the Rune deck? Like
in the what?
Not Sprite. Playing it.
They were playing pure Rune. They were playing Curry Bandit.
Yeah, someone also posted a list of like it was like Paleo, 2-element, not Rune, but it was like Paleo tier with like Bandit, Rise to Full Height, and like all of those sort of cards. So like you would just do a lot of your stuff in the end phase anyway. Obviously, like if you hit a name, sure, like it's probably not as good as it would be if you like just did the normal combo. But you would get enough value and then have like essentially a turn skip from either like Rise to Full Height or your opponent's Rune card. That seemed kind of funny. That seems like a deck that would probably have like good enough playback into like the Rune Sprite deck. Just like a deck with a bunch of cards like that where it's like, you can never kill me and I get to load up a bunch of free cards and use really powerful traps. Like that's something I think we probably will never see enough of. Like if this format ran a lot longer, you could definitely see something funny like that sort of play back at the Sprite Rune deck. Could be interesting, but obviously, we don't live in a perfect world, and all of these powerful cards are coming out, and the Paleo dream is dead. So.
Yeah. The last thing I kind of want to talk about is Fenrir. specifically in the context of the Runic matchup. Because the more I think about it, the more I think about that card, the more it makes me think like there will be scenarios where you'll be playing against the Runic Sprite deck, right? You summon Fenrir, they go quick play spell, pop it, and then Fenrir does nothing, right? And then in literally every other situation, Fenrir will destroy their entire life. You will attack, you will banish their field spell face down, and the game will be over. And like you'll just be so far ahead, like because if they have to use like what is it called, freezing curse, the one that's just like a chalice, it means they have to deal with it next turn. You know, like it'll just be there every turn, and like they'll have to keep doing that, and it will just make their life very, very difficult. You know, or they just have the smashing ground one and it just dies. But I just feel like there are a lot of instances where Fenrir will just summon, search on their copy, attack over something, banish your field spell, and like the game just ends.
Yeah.
Like that's just so hard to deal with, right? Or at least it's slow. Like the Runic Sprite deck is already a slow deck. So when one card like that just pushes them back so far and sets them so far behind, it's really hard for them to come back, I think. But I don't know how often that situation will happen. Like, what do you think about that card into that matchup? Like, is it a tool that you think will be really important for that matchup, or do you think like it will just be kind of a nuisance, but like not really get that far?
I just think it's like overall just like a decent card in general. There are much worse cards you could have in your deck against that deck than that card.
That's that good level of overlap, right? Where I think like this card is generic enough that it might fill multiple roles, whether in the main or side. So like it having some application against like the Rune Sprite deck is probably really good going into Minneapolis when you don't know what everyone's doing, right? So that's just like something you have to look at. Where it's like when you're like in the deck building process for that event specifically, where nothing is defined after a new set. This is the kind of card you definitely want to gravitate more towards because of that extra utility into the Rune matchup, where it's like whether it's last week's flavor of flavor of the month, flavor of power of the elements format. I think this is probably like not that crazy in the grand scheme of things. If the format develops, it might like fall off. But I think for this weekend, it's probably a card you'll see in everyone's side at least.
Something
like
else,
like a minimum.
Yeah, something else that I kind of thought about. I actually have a lot of thoughts on Fenrir about how I didn't quite like it, and now maybe I like it a little bit more. And I kind of just want to run through them rapid fire and get your opinion on them. So the first thing I thought about Fenrir, when I was really, really tunnel visioned on, I'm gonna play a Tier Element deck and not try anything else. I think Fenrir is very poor in the main deck of Tier Elements because it has to be your first action, right? Like you have to summon it while you have no monsters, and then it puts a monster on your field, so now all of your opponent's Bestials are alive. So it defeats the whole purpose of all of those cards that try to play around Bestials by trying to use Tier Elements before you have a monster on the field, right? So it plays really poorly into Bestials, or rather, like it just turns them all on. And then when going second, if you get like if you get Bestialed, or like you summon a Fenrir and then you like get Bestialed or something, or like they summon a Bestial monsters on their turn because they're just playing like a Bestial deck, right? And they just like summon Bestials on their turn one. Summoning Fenrir is smaller than a Bestial. It's 24 and Bestials are 25. And the argument is, well, you attack and banish one. That's terrible. Like that doesn't, Fenrir attacking and banishing a Bestial doesn't do anything. Like that's pretty bad. So I think it plays poorly into Bestials going second and first in the Tier Element deck. Then on the flip side, in other decks, I think it actually plays quite well, especially against the Runic decks, because your first action is a Fenrir, right? And I'd say right now Nibiru is not really in the format. Between Gigantic Sprite and Ruokalos and the Runic deck being so popular, Nibiru is not really a card you can main deck, I don't think. Like, I don't think you would main deck it. I think it's very, very poor in the main deck against most of the decks right now. So, probably not in the main deck. So your first action is Fenrir. You start playing. You summon all your guys, right? Like maybe you're playing Tier, maybe you're playing Sprite. You summon a whole board, right? So let's say you've even you're maybe even playing like a Runic Sprite deck, and you've got Elf and Djinn Buster and something else, and then Fenrir, and they have a Lava Golem. you've now made your board so wide because Fenrir is just one additional point of interaction. Lava Golem no longer cleanly takes out your whole field because you have too many guys. Like, you went too wide. So I think those are interesting points for Fenrir and against Fenrir, against how decks are like built currently and how I think they're trying to match up into the Bistral cards. But what do you think about that?
I think that's the interesting thing about this card. Whereas like people like to, well, like myself included, I looked at it as like Pancratops, but it's just like, no, as you mentioned, like it's just another layer on top of an end board if it is in your deck, right? Like it it just
I think it's better going first than going second.
Yeah,
which
exactly,
is unfortunate
right? Like
that I think
this
that
card doesn't like play into a board. I think the battle phase is still like, this is funny to say when, you know, Rune Sprite exists or like just Rune exists in general. I think the battle phase is still very important, right? Like skipping a battle phase in the Rune deck is like whatever, but like in this one, having to like click BP to sort of like get the mileage out of it might just not be enough. Like maybe into like Elf or something, this card is just like pretty well positioned going second, but yeah, I don't know, man. Like I think this card is very good. I need to play with it more to give you a definitive answer. I think Jeff has probably played with it more than both of us, so he can cover, you know. Go on, Jeff.
Yeah, that was all I had to say. Yeah.
What specifically?
I have played Fenrir more than you guys.
I mean, I agree that Fenrir is. I don't think it's bad going second by any means. Because it's just a card that immediately has to be dealt with. The one thing I did come up when playing with it is that, and we didn't talk about it earlier, is that Sprite gets a new trap card, and I think it's insane. Sprite Double Cross, and it basically allows you to either absorb any monster your opponent controls or is in their graveyard to an Xyz monster you control, or you can take control of that monster from the field or graveyard to one of your link monsters zones it points to. So I have been searching that card with Sprite more than the quick play spell. The Smashers, because it also kind of acts as a way to disrupt the graveyard as well. So if your opponent activates a tier monster, you can just take it from the graveyard, and then it just, like, you DD-pro'd it, but you also got to take it. On top of that, it makes it so if they summon a Fenrir, you immediately just take their Fenrir, and now your Fenrir works for you.
Yes. Yes, he works for me now. Correct.
So I don't think it's terrible going second, but that was something that started happening a lot. I was like, holy crap, now I'm up against a Toad and two double Toad, and my Fenrir, you just can't do anything.
Yeah. A lot of loyalty for a hired gun.
Going first, again, it's a body that replaces itself as well as a form of interruption. And I think on top of the fact that after the next set comes out, I think the Kastari, whatever they are, cards, that new boss monster they get is absolutely absurd.
Would you say that Fenrir double crossed you?
Yes, Fenrir 100% double crossed me, and it made me
very
upset.
Anyways,
it's just a card that for a generic just summon whenever it does a lot, and we don't have a lot of those just kind of generic any deck can use this card does a lot type of thing.
I know we say this like a good chunk when we talk about cards that come out of Japan. I think this card with Maxi just seems kind of silly, right? Like this is just a card that counters their Maxi.
It gets under Maxi.
But when you have Maxi, yeah, like when you have no, but I mean like it counters it in the sense that like you're just generating a point of interaction before even committing into Maxi, which doesn't happen too often. And then like when you are able to summon this and even just like pass back to their interaction, like whether it be like Impalm, whatever, on like your actual play, and then have your own Maxi, I think just like this card being so free makes it maybe a little bit more silly in like most of the Japan formats, even just ignoring a Shizu. Like it just seems like so well rounded. And then it just also probably plays into the whole like, wow, I'm glad Maxi is banned in TCG. that would just be toxic.
It doesn't.
Like, whenever you just have cards that just ignore that entirely of like.
Doesn't beat Mystic
Okay,
Mine.
we have Maxi.
Because it needs to attack.
It really doesn't, huh?
Yep. Oh god. Oh well.
What if my opponent activates Mystic Mine and chains DD Crew, so I can banish their Mystic Mine?
It still wouldn't, because then on a new chain Mystic Mine would resolve, and then you couldn't activate Fenrir.
It's not a quick. It's a trigger effect.
It's a trigger effect.
Yeah, it happens after the card resolves.
If it was a quick effect.
Max didn't realize that at first.
If it was a quick effect, Fenrir would be the best card ever printed, and I guarantee you at the YCS, you will have at least 3 opponents that will try to chain. So for those of you who don't know how Fenrir works, because there's a trigger effect, not a quick effect, is if your opponent activates, is it a monster effect? That's what Fenrir triggers on, right?
Yes, your opponent a monster effect anywhere.
If your opponent activates a monster effect, if your opponent activates a monster effect, a true Draco is a quick effect. So a true Draco will just chain directly to the effect and will activate the card from the deck or search it or whatever. Fenrir is a trigger effect, so it will wait until the entire monster effect has resolved. Then on a new chain, Fenrir can activate. So if your opponent has a Fenrir and you summon, I don't know, Fire Fist Bear, I can literally come think, and activate effect to pop their Fenrir. Fenrir doesn't chain and then banish your card. If Fenrir is removed from the field by the chain, it will not, or negated, on the chain, it will not be able to banish something. So because like it can't be a quick effect because it also triggers like when it attacks, like it's a whole thing, right?
That's just a lot more sense. I sort of tunneled and looked at it, and like obviously cards that are quick effect now just state quick effect anyway.
Yes, cards that are quick effects like that now will say quick effect on the card. So I guarantee you at the YCS, at least one of your opponents that has a Fenrir will try to use it wrong, and it will be a whole judge call. And that's how it works. So
it's also interesting to note that like so this did come up with like a little bit of testing that I was watching last night. And it's interesting now because like I was half awake when I was thinking about it. But no, like this card can be Chain Link 1, and there might be an instance where like you're able to like take something off the board before it itself is able to like trigger or do something. I guess it's like trying to think of where it would be relevant, but like
what do you
probably
mean?
Few and far between. Well, like because it is a trigger effect, like maybe it's able to proc as Chain Link 1. It still targets, right? It just doesn't make a difference. Like it's not gonna.
I think so.
It does target, yeah. So like it's not like non-targeting. Like you remove like a Kit Kalos on board before it's like able to trigger in a new chain.
No, that's never.
But more to exactly. But like if there is an effect that is like, oh, this card has to remain face up or something ignorant, like you can get caught out where if this triggers on like your turn player, and it'll trigger before their trigger effect can go off. Like who knows, right? Like that's like the little relevant like trick behind like some of the cards that have like trigger effects, where it's like your turn player and like 2 trigger effects will go off, and you'll go Chain Link 1 and they'll go Chain Link 2. Like it's your opponent's turn. You have this on board, like they'll go Chain Link 1, you'll go Chain Link 2 with this, right? Like that's the little thing you sort of also have to remember. I think a lot of people will like mess up this card itself.
I can't think of an example where what you're talking about is relevant with the current cards off the top of my head, but I think I get what you're saying.
But it could be a thing.
Sure.
Who knows, right?
Yeah. Something more.
Yeah. Like quite literally Ghost Mourner. Yes, this is just Ghost Mourner, but better. Yeah.
What?
Not comparable.
Anyways. Yes, comparable in that they are trigger effects and monster cards, and that is where their comparison ends.
And people don't know how trigger effects.
And people don't know trigger effects work. Yes. So we went on a big tangent on trigger effects versus quick effects there.
I was about to say, I feel
to explain absolutely nothing. So I think we call it a close here. We've gone over an hour, and I think we've talked about. I think we got a good chunk in. So good luck to those of you competing in YCS in Minneapolis.
And then next time we'll be back, we'll be able to discuss the results.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we can talk about the Ishizu card.
Let's see. Probably not. I don't think.
If we can do a whole 30-minute thing about the Ishizu cards and triggering effects as well.
Yeah.
How once Ishizu cards are out, we go up to like Chain Link 12 every match.
Yeah. Oh my god.
I'd hope not.
We'll see.
It'll happen.
With that, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.